Hello everyone, I'm really glad you're here. Tonight, I want to help you let go of the day and ease into rest. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, and it means a lot to be part of your nightly routine. So if you haven't already, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. It truly helps. Now, settle in, close your eyes, and let's begin the first story. My name is Raymond Kowalski, and I've spent most of my life behind the wheel of an 18-wheeler. Most days, my job is a blur of highways and rest stops, a quiet rhythm of fuel gauges and mile markers, punctuated by laughter shared with friends over late-night poker games or warm phone calls with family. But there's one memory that has refused to fade, a night that tore through that routine like shattered glass. It began during a long haul from Houston, Texas to Boston, Massachusetts, a trip that already felt endless after several days on the road. When I pulled into a 24-hour truck stop, I thought I'd just grab an energy drink, trade a few jokes with the cashier and keep moving. But as I left, the man behind the counter called out, his voice losing its playful edge. "Don't go near those woods, driver. Folks say it's not safe out there after dark." I laughed it off. Small-town warnings are often steeped in old rumors, stories meant to keep kids out of trouble. Still, his words clung faintly in my mind as I walked across the parking lot to my rig. The cool night air pressing in on me like an unseen weight. As twilight melted into the heavy darkness of night, I decided to pull into a modest roadside motel for a few hours of rest. The room was simple but quiet, a soft refuge from the endless rumble of asphalt and engines. I called home to hear the voices of my wife and kids, assuring them I'd be in Boston within 2 days. After setting my alarm, I allowed exhaustion to drag me under. But in the dead of night, a sound tore me from sleep. Police sirens wailed outside, their flashing lights casting wild shadows across the ceiling. The clock read 3:13 a.m. With my pulse pounding, I parted the curtains just enough to see multiple squad cars clustered around an apartment complex across the street. Then, through the chaos, a figure emerged, hooded and masked. He moved with a predator's speed, vanishing into the woods near the motel before I could process what I'd seen. My first instinct was to call the police, but what could I tell them? The man was already gone. The morning was heavy with fog, the kind that seemed to muffle sound and slow time. After gathering my things, I stopped in the motel lobby and noticed a newspaper on the counter. The headline caught me like a hook. Local woman brutally attacked overnight. The article spoke of savagery, of suffering so great the details had been spared for the reader's sake. My thoughts snapped back to the hooded figure sprinting into the forest hours earlier. The cold dread settled deep in my gut. Yet I pushed forward, eager to put miles between myself and this quiet town. By mid-morning, the highway stretched wide and empty before me. Local radio chatter was alive with speculation about a dangerous vigilante, a man they called the Avenger. I gripped the wheel tighter as the voices on the radio blurred into static. That's when the rig lurched violently to the side. Something had slammed against the trailer. My heart thundered as I fought to steady the truck, tires screeching in protest. Finally bringing it to a shuddering halt, I reached for the door, preparing to inspect the damage. And that's when I saw him. The hooded figure from the night before was standing just yards away, blades glinting under the pale glow of a roadside lamp. His eyes, cold and deliberate, locked onto mine. Instinct took over. I slammed the locks on the cab doors and fumbled for my phone, hands trembling as I began recording him. If he lunged at me, at least there would be evidence left behind. He didn't move for a moment, his gaze unflinching, before suddenly sprinting back into the trees. My breath came in short, ragged gasps as I called 911, stammering to explain what had just happened. Another trucker pulled in behind me. When I showed him the video, the colour drained from his face. "That's Douglas Sharp," he whispered. "They say he's avenging his family, slaughtered by a gang years ago. He thinks he's bringing justice, but God help anyone he decides is guilty." The following days were a blur of tension and rumours. People locked their doors tight at night, unwilling to venture out after dark. Then, as suddenly as it began, the attack stopped. The community exhaled in relief, believing the nightmare was over, but for me, it was only beginning. A week later, I received a text from an unknown number. It was a photo of my family standing in front of our house. Beneath it, in jagged letters, was a single word: justice. My stomach turned to ice. He knew where I lived. Panic ripped through me as I called my wife, instructing her to pack the kids and leave for her sister's house hours away. They moved quickly, but my mind couldn't stop spiraling. Even as I pressed on toward Boston, my thoughts raced with every possible scenario of him finding them. Days later, I learned Douglas Sharp had been killed in a shootout with police. They cornered him in those same woods I had seen him vanish into. His reign of terror ending in blood on his body, they found a letter addressed to me. In it, Douglas claimed he had no grudge against me, writing that he had investigated me thoroughly and found the accusations false. Still, the words brought no comfort. Even now, years later, I can't shake the memory of his eyes, filled with a hatred so deep it seemed inhuman. The open road no longer feels like freedom to me. It feels like a corridor of shadows, each turn hiding some new terror. And sometimes, when the night grows too quiet, I hear his voice in my head, whispering from the dark, "Justice." Let's dive into the next disturbing story. My name is Raymond Witherspoon, and for as long as I can remember, the open road has been my constant companion. Truck driving isn't just a job, it's a lifestyle. But as much as I've loved the quiet solitude of endless highways, there are memories that stain the comfort of that routine. Some things you witness never quite leave you, no matter how many miles you put between yourself and the moment they happened. This particular story begins in the heart of Kansas, at a remote warehouse far from the bustling cities I was used to. The air felt heavier there, charged with a quiet unease I couldn't shake, though I tried to tell myself it was only fatigue after a long night behind the wheel. As I pulled into the gravel lot, I spotted my supervisor for the day, Carlos Norton, waving at me from across the yard. "Hey Ray, how's it hanging?" he called out. "Just another day in paradise," I replied, forcing a chuckle that didn't quite reach my eyes. In truth, I felt drained, mentally, physically, and something deeper I couldn't quite name. No, Carlos, a cheerful guy who usually had a joke ready to lighten the mood, seemed oddly serious that morning. He led me into the warehouse, unlocking the heavy metal doors that groaned open to reveal a near-empty interior. The echo of our footsteps felt almost too loud in the cavernous space. "We need these crates transported to Baltimore," Carlos said, gesturing toward a stack of large wooden boxes shoved into a far corner. As we approached, a pungent, sickly smell hit us like a wave. Both of us gagged instinctively. Carlos scanned his clipboard, but his face drained of colour. "I don't know what's in these crates," he murmured, his voice tight. "Let's just get them loaded and get out of here." There was a fear in his tone that sent a shiver down my spine, and though my instincts screamed for me to press for answers, I kept my questions to myself. The loading process took less than 15 minutes, though every second felt drawn out, stretched thin by the uneasiness clawing at my gut. As I secured the last crate and closed the trailer doors, I noticed Carlos hurrying back to his vehicle without even a parting word. His departure left the air even heavier, as though the warehouse itself was holding its breath. Climbing into the cab of my truck, I fired up the engine, eager to leave this place behind. But then, movement in my side mirror caught my eye. A man stepped out from behind the remaining stacks of crates, his presence startling in the stillness. He wore a tattered coat and an old hat pulled low, a wild beard obscuring much of his face. Though his features were partially hidden, there was something hauntingly familiar about him. He stood there for a long moment, studying my truck with an intensity that sent my heart racing, then vanished back into the shadows as silently as he had appeared. No, I tried to shake the image from my mind as I pulled onto the road, telling myself it was nothing, just a drifter or a warehouse worker curious about the truck. But as the miles unspooled beneath my tyres, the man's face hovered in my thoughts like a phantom. Hours later, while traversing a desolate stretch of highway, a sudden jolt rocked my truck. Something had struck it with enough force to push me dangerously close to a ditch. White-knuckled, I wrestled the wheel, managing to steady the wheel before disaster struck. My heart pounded in my ears as I checked my mirrors. And then I saw him. The bearded man stood in the road behind me, weapon in hand, his expression unreadable but heavy with menace. Panic surged through me as I pulled over, fumbling for my phone to call for help, but out here in the middle of nowhere the signal was weak, my calls failing to connect. The air inside the cab felt thick, almost suffocating, as the smell from the crate seemed to intensify, curling into my nostrils and twisting my stomach. I made the decision to keep driving, desperate to put distance between myself and the man, but at every stop, every quiet moment, I felt his presence lurking just beyond my vision. It wasn't until I pulled into a rural gas station for fuel that I decided I couldn't ignore the nagging dread any longer. Summoning my courage, I pried open one of the crates. What I saw turned my blood cold. Inside were mutilated human remains, torn apart and piled in a grotesque mockery of order. Before I could process the horror, a noise behind me made my skin crawl. Spinning around, I saw the bearded man step out of the shadows, his eyes glinting with a feral light. In his hand he held a crowbar, and his lips twisted into a sickening grin. He raised the weapon, swinging it down with terrifying force, but some deep instinct saved me. I jumped back, and the crowbar struck the ground where my skull had been moments earlier. For a second, we stared at each other in a frozen stalemate. Then, a shout split the air. The gas station attendant, armed with a baseball bat, charged toward us. "That's Harrison Merrick," he yelled. "He's been killing people for months. Call the police." Seizing the distraction, I bolted for my truck, heart hammering as I leapt into the cab and slammed the door shut. My fingers shook as I dialed 911. Finally connecting as I sped down the highway. The dispatcher's calm voice was my lifeline as I relayed everything. The crates, the attack, the maniac who seemed to materialize from the dark. For days, Merrick pursued me, appearing when I least expected it, forcing me into dangerous maneuvers and near misses on treacherous roads. He seemed to know every shortcut, every blind spot, as if he had been watching me long before I saw him in that warehouse. Each night, sleep became a luxury I could no longer afford. My paranoia kept me alert, eyes darting to every mirror, ears straining for sounds that weren't there. When I finally reached a truck stop with a strong police presence, I showed the officers my recording of Merrick. Their faces hardened with recognition. "We've been after him for months," one said grimly. "He's a predator, smart and vicious. You're lucky to be alive. With their help, I laid a trap, using my rig as bait to lure him out. But Merrick was too clever. At the last moment, he vanished into the night, leaving behind only the echo of his mocking laughter. Even now, though months have passed, I can't escape the weight of that encounter. Harrison Merrick is still out there somewhere, a shadow stalking the highways, waiting for his next victim. And as I sit behind the wheel, staring at the endless stretch of asphalt before me, I can't help but wonder if our paths will cross again. The road feels longer now, the night darker and the silence heavier. For in that silence, I sometimes hear the faint clink of a crowbar and the low, rasping laugh of a man who hunts in the shadows. Let's dive into the next disturbing story. My name is Kermit Fry, and I've been a trucker long enough to know that the open road has its share of strange stories. We all hear them, the whispers over static-filled CB radios, the tales told in hushed tones at late-night truck stops. But until last year, I thought they were just that, stories. That changed on a cool autumn evening in Montana, when I discovered that some of those stories are all too real. The day had started like any other, my rig rumbling across quiet highways lined with endless stretches of forest and farmland. Traffic was unusually light, and for a while I enjoyed the solitude. When I reached a secluded rest stop nestled among towering pines, I decided to take advantage of the quiet. I parked the truck, grabbed my thermos and stretched my legs, letting the crisp air wake me up. The place felt almost too still, though I chalked it up to fatigue and brushed the thought aside. As I walked across the lot, something strange caught my attention. Near another parked truck, a man was crouched low, carefully wrapping duct tape around its exhaust pipe. He looked jittery, glancing over his shoulder every few seconds. For a moment, I froze, uncertain whether to approach him or mind my own business. But when he noticed me watching, his eyes widened, and without a word, he bolted into the woods, disappearing between the trees, as if the shadows had swallowed him whole. Unease prickled down my spine. My first instinct was to call the police, but I couldn't prove he had done anything illegal. Instead, I reported it to our dispatch centre, hoping they'd send someone to check on it. Then I climbed back into my truck, unaware of how the night was about to unravel. Hours later, as darkness fell thick over the road, I found myself navigating narrow, winding stretches flanked by dense forests. The rhythmic hum of the engine lulled me into a light daze, but a faint thud against the trailer jarred me awake. At first I thought it was a pothole, but then came a soft, irregular tapping. Heart pounding, I glanced at my side mirror and froze. Clinging to the rear of my trailer was a man, his muscular arms wrapped tightly around the frame. Even in the dim light, I could see his face was twisted into a grin, eyes wide and unblinking as he stared directly at my cab. Panic surged through me, and I tightened my grip on the wheel. Slamming the brakes would have sent the truck skidding, but I couldn't let him stay back there. Desperately, I swerved hard, hoping the motion would shake him loose. The trailer rocked violently, but the man didn't budge. He clung on with inhuman strength, his coat flapping wildly in the wind. I stomped on the accelerator, tires squealing as I sped through small towns and empty stretches, hoping to find help. My pulse hammered in my ears as the headlights of a police cruiser came into view in the distance. But as I neared the town, the man abruptly let go, vanishing into the darkness like smoke dissipating in the night air. Breathless and trembling, I pulled over at a gas station and tried to calm myself. The clerk gave me an odd look as I stumbled inside, but I said nothing. What could I say? That a stranger had clung to my truck for miles like some kind of predator? I needed to keep moving, yet my hands wouldn't stop shaking. The next morning, I resumed my journey, keeping my eyes darting constantly to the mirrors. That's when a chilling report crackled over the radio. Several brutal attacks on truckers in the area. Victims left maimed or worse. The suspect's description matched the man I had seen clinging to my trailer. Later that day, I crossed paths with a fellow trucker named Harold. I waved him down and shared what I had witnessed, desperate for some validation that I wasn't losing my mind. Harold's face paled as he listened. "Kermit," he said gravely. "I've heard about him. Locals call him Jackknife Joe. They say he's got strength like no man should have, and once he picks his target, he doesn't stop." The words hung heavy in the cab like a gathering storm. From that moment on, every mile felt like a countdown, every shadow a possible hiding place for Joe's return. That night, the darkness outside my cab window seemed thicker than usual, pressing in like a living thing. I fought to keep my eyes open, but exhaustion crept over me like a heavy blanket. Then came the sound, a faint tapping, like fingers drumming on the metal of my trailer. My blood turned cold. I didn't need to look to know who it was. Jackknife Joe had returned. With trembling hands, I grabbed my phone and began recording. The screen showed him clinging to the back of my truck once again, his movements calm and calculated, as if he had all the time in the world. Summoning every ounce of courage, I devised a desperate plan. I drove toward a town I knew had a police station, hoping to lure Joe into a trap. The plan worked, at least partially. As I pulled into a brightly lit gas station near the station, Joe finally released his grip, dropping to the ground with uncanny agility. The police rushed in as I leapt from my cab, shouting warnings, but Joe was already gone, slipping into the woods with that same eerie calmness, leaving only my video footage behind. In the days that followed, my recording circulated among truckers and law enforcement alike. Warnings went out across CB channels, but Jackknife Joe remained elusive, his legend growing with every retailing. Even now, I wonder where he is, lurking out there on some forgotten stretch of highway, waiting for his next victim. Each time I park at a lonely rest stop or drive through a shadowed forest, I find myself gripping the wheel tighter, praying that I'll never hear that tapping sound again. Let's dive into the next disturbing story. My name is Portofolio, and I've spent most of my adult life hauling cargo across the country. The open road is where I feel at home. Mile after mile, the steady hum of the engine beneath me, the loneliness tempered by brief stops at diners and truck stops. But not every mile is peaceful. Some nights the road holds shadows that seem alive, watching, waiting for the moment you least expect. One such night in Montana showed me just how fragile the illusion of safety really is. It started as an ordinary day. I was cruising down a quiet highway just outside Helena, enjoying the rare serenity that comes from a lack of traffic. Stopping at an old roadside diner, I grabbed a quick burger and overheard two locals talking about a string of strange incidents in the area. Accidents, disappearances, and an air of dread that seemed to hang over the community. I didn't think much of it at the time. As a trucker, I'd heard my share of eerie small-town tales. After finishing my meal, I headed back out, eager to reach my next destination before nightfall. As the sun dipped below the horizon, a car pulled onto the highway behind me. At first, I didn't pay it much attention. Cars come and go on long stretches like this. But after 20 minutes, I noticed it hadn't passed me or fallen back. Instead, it kept pace, staying just far enough behind that its headlights glared in my mirrors, but close enough to feel deliberate. Unease began to creep in. I tried speeding up. The car matched my pace. I slowed down. It slowed too. For the next hour, I attempted everything, changing speeds, taking random turns, but no matter what I did, the car stayed with me like a shadow glued to my trailer. My heart started pounding harder as night fell completely, the world around us consumed by darkness. I contemplated calling for help, but hesitated, feeling foolish. What could I say? That a car was following me? It wasn't illegal, not yet. And besides, maybe I was overthinking it. Then it happened. Without warning, the car surged forward and sideswiped my rig, the impact jarring me violently as I struggled to keep control. Tires screeched, and for a terrifying moment I thought the whole truck would tip. Somehow I managed to straighten out, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly they ached. The car screeched to a halt up ahead, its door opening slowly. And then I saw him. The driver stepped out, a tall, unnaturally lanky man in a long trench coat that seemed to sway even in the still air. The night obscured his features, but there was something off about the way he moved. In one hand, he held a small hatchet, its blade catching the faint glow of my headlights. My chest tightened as fear surged through me. Every instinct screamed at me to flee. Slamming my foot on the accelerator, I steered the truck directly toward him, hoping to scare him off. At the last moment, he stepped aside, narrowly avoiding the rig. In my mirrors, I saw him turn slowly to watch me, his head tilted in an unnatural angle that made my stomach churn. Then, he walked back to his car, climbed in, and began the pursuit once again. My heart raced as I pushed the truck faster, but the car stayed close, headlights burning into me like a predator's eyes. Finally, in the distance, I spotted the welcoming glow of a truck stop. Desperation fueled me as I swerved into the lot, hoping the presence of other people would deter him. As I parked, the car rolled in behind me and stopped. The man stepped out once more, trench coat billowing as he emerged into the light. I didn't wait to see what he'd do next. Grabbing my phone, I ran inside shouting for help. A few other truckers turned to look, and one woman, Sandra, immediately stiffened. "You said a tall guy in a trench coat?" she asked. Her voice hushed. When I nodded, her face went pale. "That's Malcolm," she whispered. "He's been stalking truckers for months, waiting for the right moment to strike." We gathered as a group, barricading ourselves inside the diner while someone called the police. Outside, Malcolm circled the lot, hatchet glinting under the streetlights. He seemed in no rush, as though he enjoyed drawing out the fear. Minutes stretched into an eternity before the sound of sirens split the night air. Malcolm froze, then turned and walked back to his car. Without haste, he drove off into the darkness, disappearing as if he'd never been there. Even now, I can't shake the memory of his hollow eyes and the quiet way he stalked me. Somewhere out there, Malcolm still waits in the shadows, and every time I hit the road, I wonder if I'll see that trench coat again. Let's dive into the next disturbing story. My name is Patrick Callahan, and I've always considered myself a simple man. Driving trucks wasn't just my job, it was my way of life. There's a strange kind of peace in endless highways and the soft hum of tyres on asphalt, but sometimes the road has a darkness that no amount of headlights can pierce. I learned that on a cold night in Amarillo, Texas, one that still creeps into my thoughts when the world is too quiet. I'd pulled into a truck stop on the outskirts of town after a long haul across the state. My body ached from hours behind the wheel, and the warm lights of the diner beckoned like a safe haven. As I parked, my old friend Bruce Kenthy approached my window. We'd crossed paths plenty of times over the years, exchanging small talk and stories to break the monotony of life on the road. Tonight, though, his face was pale, his usual easygoing smile replaced by a tightness around his mouth. "You heard about the escaped convict in the area?" he asked, lowering his voice. "They're calling him the Widowmaker. Word is, he gouges out his victim's eyes with his bare hands." A chill ran through me despite my effort to laugh it off. "Sounds like the kind of story that ruins a good meal, Bruce." He didn't smile. Together we stepped inside and took a booth near the window. The diner smelled of fried food and coffee, but even that comforting aroma couldn't dispel the uneasy feeling coiling in my stomach. As we ate in silence, I found myself glancing toward the door every few minutes, scanning the faces of the late-night patron. After finishing my burger, I excused myself and headed for the restroom. The hallway was dimly lit, the hume of a flickering light overhead the only sound. I washed my hands and glanced up into the mirror, then froze. Behind me, reflected in the cracked glass, stood a tall man in a tattered jumpsuit, his face and clothing streaked with what looked like blood. My heart lurched. His eyes locked onto mine, and in that instant, I understood every warning Bruce had shared. Without thinking, I lunged for the door, my pulse roaring in my ears. The man's hand swiped at me, but caught only air as I stumbled out into the diner, shouting Bruce's name. Heads turned, and a few startled patrons began rising from their seats. The door to the restrooms swung open behind me, and there he was, the Widowmaker. Chaos erupted as people screamed and scrambled for cover. A waitress ducked into the storage room with a handful of others, her voice trembling as she yelled, "Call 911! I grabbed Bruce by the arm, dragging him behind an overturned table as the Widowmaker advanced. His boots thudded heavily against the linoleum floor, each step deliberate, like a predator savouring the fear in the room. We could hear his ragged breathing, the sound of his nails tapping against the walls as he hunted us. My phone buzzed in my hand, but I didn't dare answer. Any sound might draw him closer. Deafening crash split the air as he kicked open the storage room door. The screams that followed were unlike anything I'd ever heard. Raw, primal, filled with a terror so pure it seemed to vibrate in my bones. I clenched my jaw, trying to block out the horror, but the Widowmaker's laughter cut through it all like a serrated blade. Then, as quickly as it started, silence fell. The only sound was my own ragged breathing. I dared to peek over the edge of the table. The Widowmaker stood in the centre of the diner, his chest rising and falling with each heavy breath. His hands, slick with blood, hung at his sides as his dark eyes scanned the room. For a moment, I thought he was going to turn and leave, but he didn't. His head tilted slightly, and he started walking straight toward us. I braced myself, gripping a broken chair leg like a weapon. Just as he reached the table, the wail of sirens filled the air. Red and blue lights danced through the diner windows and the Widowmaker froze. For the first time, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, not fear, but annoyance. He turned and ran, disappearing out the back door as the police stormed in. Though the officers searched every corner of the truck stop and beyond, the Widowmaker was gone. In the weeks that followed, his name spread like wildfire across the country. He became a ghost story for some, a living nightmare for others. And though I survived that night, I've never been able to shake the memory of those eyes staring back at me in the mirror. Cold, merciless, and patient. Somewhere out there, the Widowmaker still walks, and every creak of a floorboard or shadow in my rear-view mirror makes me wonder if he's found another victim. Let's dive into the next disturbing story. My name is Garrison Hendrick, and I've spent more years than I can count on the road, weaving through the veins of America with nothing but the drone of my engine and my thoughts to keep me company. People assume trucking is monotonous, but for those of us who live it, the road has a way of testing you. Sometimes, it's a mechanical failure in the middle of nowhere. Other times, it's the weight of loneliness creeping in like fog, but every so often the road hands you something darker. Something that feels like it's watching from just beyond the reach of your headlights. That's what happened to me on Highway 70 in New Mexico. It began like any other night. I'd stopped at a run-down gas station on the edge of Las Cruces to refuel and grab snacks. Inside, I noticed an elderly woman standing near the counter. She looked disheveled, her wide, darting eyes giving her the air of a frightened bird. Out of instinct, I asked if she was all right. Her voice was low but sharp, cutting through the hum of the refrigerator coolers. "Watch yourself out there," she warned, her words laced with an urgency that chilled me. "There's someone watching, waiting." Her warning followed me as I rolled back onto the highway. I tried to brush it off, telling myself she was probably confused, or maybe paranoid from years of isolation. But as the sun sank and darkness swallowed the road, I couldn't shake the feeling that she'd left me with. The New Mexico desert at night can make you feel like you're the only soul alive on Earth. With my radio turned up to drown out the silence, I pressed on, my tires humming over the endless asphalt. Then it started. The CB radio crackled suddenly, and a voice broke through, a deep, distorted sound that sent goosebumps prickling across my arms. I couldn't make out the words, but there was something wrong in the tone, something inhuman. My hand shot out to turn the radio off, but the silence that followed didn't bring comfort. Instead, it made me hyper-aware of every sound. The wind whipping against the cab, the groan of the trailer, my own breathing. Up ahead, I spotted a car pulled off to the side of the road, its hazard lights blinking weakly. Normally, I'd have stopped to check if they needed help. Truckers look out for one another out here. But something about the scene felt wrong. The car was angled awkwardly, one door ajar, and a faint glint on the ground beside it caught my eye. As I slowed, I realized it was a trail. Dark stains leading from the car into the desert beyond. Blood. An icy dread settled in my stomach. I knew I should drive on, call the police when I reached the next town. But before I could decide, movement in my mirror drew my eyes. A figure stood just behind my trailer, illuminated by my brake lights. He was tall and lean, his clothes dark, his face obscured by shadows. He didn't move. He just stood there, watching. My pulse thundered in my ears as I shifted gears and slammed my foot on the accelerator. The truck roared forward, but when I checked the mirror again, he was gone. That should have been the end of it. But miles down the road, as I approached another stretch of desert, my headlights caught a flash of movement. The figure was back, standing on the shoulder, closer this time, and even as I barreled past, his head turned, following my truck with unnatural stillness. I drove for hours, my eyes darting constantly between the road and my mirrors. At a rest stop, I debated pulling over for the night, but fear overrode my exhaustion. I pressed on until the sky lightened with dawn. and the desert gave way to small towns and scattered houses. It wasn't until I stopped at a diner for breakfast that I allowed myself to breathe. Inside, an old-timer struck up a conversation. When I described what I'd seen, his expression darkened. "You met Martin Sinclair," he said grimly. "He's been haunting these highways for years. No one knows what he wants, or if he's even human anymore." That night I couldn't sleep. And even now, months later, the road feels different. Every time I check my mirror, I half expect to see him there, standing still, waiting for me to stop long enough to catch up. Let's dive into the next disturbing story. My name is Connor Beckett, and I've never been the kind of man to believe in ghost stories or urban legends. Trucking across America for years has given me a pretty skeptical outlook. If I can't see it, touch it, or haul it, it probably doesn't exist. But last month, somewhere deep in Wisconsin farmland, I learned that the road sometimes hides things no skeptic can explain away. It started like any other long-haul run. I'd been driving for hours, the endless fields of corn and soy blurring together as I pushed through fatigue. Hunger gnawed at my stomach, so when I spotted a neon sign flickering faintly in the distance, I turned off the highway. The diner stood like a relic from another time, chrome siding dulled by years of weather. Its sign proclaiming open 24 hours, even though there were no other vehicles in the lot. Still, the smell of food was inviting enough to make me park and step inside. The place was eerily quiet. The single waitress behind the counter greeted me with a tired smile. "You look like you've been on the road too long," she said, pouring me a coffee before I even asked. I smiled back, grateful for the small kindness. As I sipped the steaming cup, my eyes wandered to the far wall. Newspaper clippings covered nearly every inch, their yellowed pages chronicling a series of disappearances, all truckers who had gone missing along this stretch of highway. A chill brushed over me, but I shrugged it off. Small towns have their share of tragedies, I told myself. I ordered a burger and settled into a booth. Outside the window, fields stretched out into blackness, broken only by a thin row of bushes. Movement caught my eye, a figure shifting between the shrubs, though it was hard to make out details in the dim light. The figure seemed to glisten as though drenched in some thick liquid. Curiosity tugged at me. Setting down my fork, I stepped outside into the night air. The smell hit me first, metallic, like rust or blood. My stomach turned and I called out, "Hey, you all right out there?" But there was no reply. Whoever or whatever I'd seen was gone. Shaking off the unease, I returned to my truck and climbed into the cab. Hours later, parked at a rest stop miles down the road, I tried to sleep. But just as I began to drift off, a tap on the window jolted me awake. My breath caught as I turned. Staring back at me was a man's face, his skin slick with dark, reddish-brown streaks. His eyes were wide, unblinking, and filled with a hunger that made my blood run cold. I fumbled for my phone with trembling hands and dialed 911, whispering my location as the man began pounding on the glass. Each hit reverberated through the cab like a drumbeat. The dispatcher's voice tried to calm me, but I couldn't focus. My heart raced as I watched the man circle the truck, dragging his fingers along the metal, leaving streaks of whatever he was covered in. Summoning every ounce of courage, I flung open the door and bolted for the brightly lit rest stop building. Behind me, I heard footsteps pounding against the pavement. I didn't dare look back. Once inside, I locked the door and shouted for help. A few other drivers rushed over, their faces pale as they listened to my frantic story. One of them, a grizzled veteran with decades on the road, spoke up quietly. "That sounds like Cyrus Newman," he said. "He was a hitman, banished years ago. They say he stalks highways now, covered in the blood of his victims." The police arrived minutes later, but by then the man was gone. Still, the image of his face pressed against my window lingers in my mind, and every time I pull into a lonely diner or rest stop, I find myself scanning the shadows, half expecting to see those wide, predatory eyes staring back at me. Somewhere out there, Cyrus is still waiting. Let's dive into the next disturbing story. My name is Samuel Vickers, and after 20 years of trucking, I thought I'd seen just about everything the road could throw at me. Blizzards, black ice, even wildfires tearing across highways. But there's one night I'll never forget, and no storm or road hazard could compare to the chill it left in my bones. It was early spring in Oregon, and a steady rain had been falling for hours, turning the asphalt into a slick black river beneath my tires. I was on Highway 20, heading toward Bend, when I noticed her. A girl, no more than 16 or 17, standing on the shoulder in the downpour. She was barefoot and dressed in a simple white gown, the kind you might see at a graduation or wedding. The long, dark hair clung to her face, and her arms were wrapped tightly around her chest as if she were trying to keep from freezing. I slowed instinctively. In all my years, I'd never been able to pass by someone in need, especially not a kid out in the rain. Pulling onto the shoulder, I rolled down the window. "You okay, miss? Need a ride somewhere?" She didn't answer. Her eyes met mine, and something in their depth made my stomach clench. It wasn't fear or gratitude. It was emptiness, like staring into a deep well with no bottom. Still, I couldn't leave her there. "Hop in," I said, unlocking the passenger door. She climbed in without a word, water pooling on the floor mat beneath her feet. I cranked up the heat and handed her a towel from behind my seat. "Where to?" I asked, forcing a smile. Her lips parted slightly, and in a soft, almost mechanical voice, she murmured, "Home." I waited for more, an address, a landmark, but she said nothing else, only staring straight ahead as the wiper struggled against the sheets of rain. As we drove, the air in the cab seemed to grow colder. I turned the heat higher, but the chill lingered, seeping into my bones. "What's your name?" I asked, trying to break the heavy silence. Slowly she turned her head, her gaze fixing on me with that same hollow expression. "Emily," she whispered. Her voice was barely audible, yet it seemed to echo in the confined space. I nodded, forcing a friendly tone. "All right, Emily, we'll get you home safe." But when I glanced at her again, her hair, which moments ago had been plastered wet to her skin, was bone dry. My throat tightened. I gripped the wheel tighter, trying to shake the growing unease. That's when I noticed the smell, faint at first, then stronger with every passing mile. It was earthy, like damp soil mixed with decay. "Emily, where is home?" I asked, my voice tight. She didn't answer. Instead, she lifted her hand and pointed out the windshield. "Up ahead," she murmured. Through the rain, I saw a narrow gravel road veering off the highway, flanked by dense pines. Against every instinct screaming for me to keep driving, I turned. The road wound deeper into the forest, and the smell grew stronger. I slowed the truck, scanning for any sign of a house or driveway. "Emily, is this where you live?" I asked. But the passenger seat was empty. My heart slammed against my ribs. The towel I'd given her was still there, soaked through, as if it had been sitting in the rain all night. Panic surged as I shifted the truck into reverse, desperate to get back to the highway. But as I glanced in the rearview mirror, my blood turned to ice. Standing in the middle of the road behind me was Emily. Her gown billowed in the wind, and though her face was shadowed, I could feel her eyes locked on mine. Slowly, she raised her hand and waved. When I finally made it back to the main highway, I didn't stop until I reached a truck stop 30 miles away. Inside, I told the cashier what had happened, hoping for some rational explanation. He paled and shook his head. "You picked up the girl, didn't you?" he asked. "Local legend says she died out there 20 years ago, hit by a trucker in the rain. Folks say she's still trying to get home. To this day, I can't drive that stretch of highway without thinking of her, and every time it rains, I glance at my passenger seat, praying it's empty." Let's dive into the next disturbing story. My name's Archibald O'Connor, but everyone on the road just calls me Archie. I've been a long-haul truck driver for more than 2 decades now, crossing the country so many times that I could map it blindfolded. You start to think you've seen it all out here, the weird, the unexpected, the heartbreaking, but then A town like Grimesville comes along and shows you how wrong you are. That night, I was hauling a load of supplies from the East Coast, and around midnight, I pulled into that little town in desperate need of a hot meal and somewhere to park. The place was quiet, too quiet. I spotted a single diner with its lights still on and figured that was my best bet. The inside of the diner had that old school charm, with red vinyl booths, faded photos on the walls, and the kind of counter that had hosted 1,000 worn-out travellers. There was only one other customer, an unkempt man sitting at the far corner, hunched over a table. He wore a dirty beige overcoat, and his tangled hair framed a face so gaunt it looked like it belonged in a morgue. He reeked, the sour stench of something that hadn't seen soap or sunlight in weeks, and as I passed him, I noticed him sliding a black trash bag under the table. I didn't think too much of it. The road teaches you to mind your own business. I sat at the counter and placed my order with Marilyn, the chatty waitress who seemed happy to have a new face walk in. As she poured my coffee, I nodded toward the strange man. "He comes round here often?" I asked casually. Marilyn leaned in and lowered her voice. "Yeah, quiet type. He doesn't say much. We're not supposed to feed him, but I sneak him leftovers now and then. Poor guy's got nothing." Her voice was kind, but I couldn't shake the tension creeping up my spine. Something about him didn't sit right with me, though I tried not to let it show. As I ate my food and talked to Marilyn about my route and the weather, I felt my phone buzz. It was my brother Vincent. We talked for a few minutes about baseball and upcoming holidays until a loud noise behind me cut our conversation short. The man had knocked over the trash bag. Something had fallen out. My fork clattered to my plate as I turned. On the floor, in plain view of everyone in the diner, lay what looked like a human hand, bloodied and limp. The fingers curled unnaturally. Everyone froze. A breathless silence took hold. The man scrambled, snatching the hand and stuffing it back into the trash bag, then rushed out the front door and disappeared into the night. The moment shattered as gasps and panic filled the room. Marilyn dropped a glass. Someone started crying. I hung up on Vincent mid-sentence and sprinted out the door, but the man was already gone. My instincts kicked in. I had to do something. I called out to a passing patrol car and flagged down an officer, telling him everything I'd seen. He called for backup, and together we began searching the empty streets of Grimesville. The officer said his name was Walters, and as we canvassed the warehouse district near the river, he told me about a man named Jeremiah Flint, an elusive vagrant who had been suspected in several disappearances over the past few years. They'd never been able to pin anything on him. No photos, no addresses, just stories, dark ones, told by those who had seen him and lived. As we split up to cover more ground, I felt an eerie stillness settle over the buildings. Then a noise, a sharp yelp, echoed through the alley to my right. My stomach dropped. I followed the sound and found Walters lying on the ground in a pool of his own blood, his throat slashed open with precision that chilled me to the core. I backed away, pulling out my phone with one hand and grabbing a length of broken pipe with the other. I wasn't a hero, I was just a truck driver. But something inside me said if I walked away now, more people would die. I followed the faint trail of blood deeper into the district, and that's when I saw him. Jeremiah Flint, standing on the edge of the river, the trash bag still clutched in his hand. Our eyes met, and he smiled, a slow, unsettling grin that said everything without words. He didn't run. He didn't speak. He just vanished into the shadows like smoke, disappearing behind a stack of rusted crates. I could have chased him, but deep down I knew it would end badly. This man didn't live by normal rules. He was a shadow in a forgotten place, a sickness that fed on towns like Grimesville. I returned to my truck, haunted and shaken, giving my report to the arriving officers, who had found Walter's body moments too late. They searched all night and found nothing, no trace of Flint, no sign of the trash bag. But for weeks afterward, local papers covered new disappearances, and the townspeople whispered about the man with the bag. I still drive through the Midwest from time to time, but but I never take the Grimesville route anymore, and when I stop at a quiet diner in a quiet town, I always check under the tables, because out there in the stillness of America's forgotten roads, Jeremiah Flint is still walking, and he never travels light. Let's dive into the next disturbing story. My name is Dylan Hargrove, and after 18 years as a long-haul trucker, I thought I'd built up a thick skin. Bad weather, shady roadside characters, and the occasional accident, all part of the job. But there's one night that still makes my palms sweat whenever I think about it. That night, I wasn't fighting sleep or dodging reckless drivers. I was trying to survive something that shouldn't exist. It happened somewhere along Route 50 in Nevada. I'd left Ely late, hoping to make it to Fallon by morning. They call Route 50 the loneliest road in America, and they're not wrong. Hours can pass without another soul in sight, and the silence gets heavy, almost crushing. As the miles rolled under my tyres, a thick fog began to creep in, first in soft wisps, then growing denser until the world beyond my headlights was swallowed whole. I slowed my rig to a crawl, every muscle tense. The road twisted ahead, invisible beyond a few feet. The CB radio crackled with static, then fell silent. Even my usual playlist of classic rock felt intrusive in the suffocating quiet, so I shut it off. That's when I saw it. At first, just a shadow moving through the fog. It was massive, easily taller than my trailer, and gliding across the road in an unnaturally smooth motion. My first thought was a low-hanging tree branch or some kind of wildlife, but as I drew closer, I realized this wasn't like anything I'd ever seen. The shape was wrong. Too many limbs, moving in a way that didn't make sense. My stomach tightened. I eased off the gas, trying not to make a sound, my fingers gripping the wheels so tightly they ached. Then, without warning, the thing stopped. It turned, or at least it seemed to, and for the briefest moment, I swear it looked right at me. My headlights caught what might have been eyes, reflecting light like polished glass. Cold dread washed over me. It wasn't just seeing me, it was studying me. The creature began to move again, circling around my truck. I heard a scraping sound against the trailer, long, drawn out, like claws dragging over metal. The rig shuddered slightly, and I fought every instinct screaming at me to floor it. Instead, I sat frozen, praying to whatever powers might be listening. The scraping stopped. The silence that followed felt deafening, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Slowly I pressed the accelerator, the engine's low rumble breaking the stillness. The fog parted just enough for me to see the road ahead. I kept my eyes forward, refusing to check the mirrors. Something deep in my gut told me I didn't want to see what might be following. When the fog finally broke an hour later, I pulled into a rest stop and parked under the harsh glow of sodium lights. My hands shook as I lit a cigarette, trying to steady my breathing. I stepped out to check the trailer, hoping to convince myself I'd imagined it all. But there, etched into the metal like a warning, were deep parallel gouges running the length of the trailer. I didn't report it. Who would believe me? The fog had swallowed any evidence, and the road was empty as always. But even now I can still hear that sound. Metal screaming under something impossibly strong, and every time I drive through fog I find myself gripping the wheel tight, scanning for a shape in the mist. Because deep down, I know it's still out there, waiting for another lonely driver to wander into its domain. Let's dive into the next disturbing story. My name is Rick Dalton, and I've been driving trucks long enough to know that the highway at night isn't always empty. There are things out there, strange things that you only see when the world has gone quiet and you're the only soul for miles. I never believed those old truck stop tales until one night outside of Des Moines, Iowa, when I came face to face with something that still makes my blood run cold. It was a routine haul, nothing unusual about it. The clock read 2:47 a.m. as I navigated a stretch of two-lane highway surrounded by open fields. The moon was high, casting a silver glow over the landscape. Up ahead I saw a man standing by the side of the road. At first I assumed he was a stranded motorist. He was dressed in a dark suit and wore a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his head. Even from a distance, something about his stillness felt off. I slowed down, debating whether to stop. Helping people in trouble had always been second nature to me, but something deep in my gut whispered caution. As I approached, the man lifted his head slightly, and that's when I saw it. His face was smooth, completely blank. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, just pale, featureless skin that seemed to glow faintly in the moonlight. My chest tightened, an instinct took over. I hit the accelerator, swerving to avoid him. But as I glanced in my side mirror, my stomach dropped. The man wasn't standing on the shoulder anymore. He was running, no, gliding, alongside my rig, keeping pace effortlessly despite my speed. Panic surged through me. I pushed the truck harder, the engine groaning in protest. Still the man stayed with me, his faceless head tilted slightly as though he was studying me. Then he began to tap on the glass of my cab window, though he was on the wrong side for it to even make sense. The sound was faint but deliberate, like a finger rapping gently against the glass. I couldn't bring myself to look directly at him, my peripheral vision catching only flashes of his blank, pale visage. The tapping grew louder, faster. My breath came in ragged gasps as I fumbled for my CB radio, desperate to call for help. Static hissed in response. The signal was gone. Without warning, the man vanished. The tapping stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence. I kept driving, afraid to slow down, afraid even to blink. Hours later, as the sky began to lighten with dawn, I reached a truck stop on the outskirts of a small town. I stumbled inside, my hands still shaking. An older trucker at the counter gave me a curious look. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said. When I told him what happened, his expression darkened. "You met him," he said grimly. "The man with no face. Old-timers say he picks a driver now and then, stalks them for a while. If you see him again, don't stop, don't speak. Just keep moving and pray he loses interest." For weeks after, I avoided night driving altogether, but even now, when I find myself alone on a stretch of quiet highway, I catch glimpses in my mirrors, a figure in a dark suit, the pale, featureless head tilted just so, and I wonder if he's still following me, waiting for the moment I finally stop. Let's dive into the next disturbing story. My name's Thomas Tommy Graves, and after 15 years on the road as a trucker, I've learned there are places where even the bravest men refuse to stop. There's an old saying among us drivers: if you see someone hitchhiking at midnight, don't pick them up. I used to think that was just a way to spook rookies, but one rainy night in Arkansas, I found out the hard way why that warning exists. It was a Tuesday in late October. The rain had been falling steadily for hours, turning the highway into a shimmering black ribbon under my headlights. I was halfway between Little Rock and Memphis, and fatigue tugged at me like an anchor. That's when I saw him. A man in a long black coat, standing perfectly still on the shoulder. His head was low, his face hidden by the brim of a wide black hat. One pale hand extended from his sleeve, thumb pointing skyward. I slowed without thinking. Maybe it was guilt, maybe instinct, but something about seeing someone out in weather like that made it impossible to keep driving. Pulling onto the shoulder, I leaned over and opened the passenger side door. "Need a ride?" I asked. The man didn't speak. He simply nodded and climbed in. Water dripped from his coat onto the floor mat, but I didn't mind. I cranked up the heater and asked, "Where you headed?" "Anywhere you'll take me," he said softly. His voice was low and smooth, almost hypnotic. A chill ran down my spine, and I blamed the cold rain for the goosebumps rising on my arms. We drove in silence for a long time. He didn't say much, and I didn't push, but the air in the cab felt heavier with every passing mile, like the space between us was filling with invisible fog. I stole glances at him when I thought he wouldn't notice. but every time he seemed perfectly still, too still, like a mannequin or a shadow frozen in place. Then, out of nowhere, he asked, "Do you believe in death, Tommy?" My stomach dropped. I hadn't told him my name. My hands tightened on the wheel, and I forced a laugh that sounded weak even to my own ears. "I guess I do, and don't we all?" He turned his head toward me, and for the first time I saw his face, or rather, I didn't. Where his eyes and mouth should have been, there was only smooth, pale skin. My chest clenched as icy fear surged through me. I slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding to a stop in the middle of the deserted highway. "Get out!" I rasped. But when I turned to look, the seat beside me was empty. The door hadn't opened, and the floor mat was dry. No sign of water. No sign of him. Heart pounding, I threw the truck into gear and sped away, the rain blurring the world into streaks of grey. At the next truck stop I staggered inside, my legs like jelly. An old-timer sitting at the counter saw the look on my face and shook his head. "You saw him, didn't you?" he said. "The hitcher in black. Folks say if you pick him up, you're marked. He's not after a ride, he's after you." Even now, months later, I can't shake the feeling that he's still out there. Every time I drive through rain at night, I see a figure on the shoulder in my periphery. A man in a black coat, his thumb raised. I keep my eyes forward and my foot heavy on the pedal, praying I never make the mistake of stopping again. Let's dive into the next disturbing story. My name is Eddie Red Callahan, and I've been hauling freight across this country for over 20 years. The road can be lonely, sure, but I've always felt at peace behind the wheel. That is, until one foggy night in West Virginia, when I picked up a passenger who wasn't supposed to be there, and who hasn't let me forget it since. I was running a late delivery from Charleston to Pittsburgh, weaving my way through the twisting mountain roads. Around 3 a.m. a thick blanket of fog settled over the highway and visibility dropped to near zero. I slowed to a crawl, gripping the wheel tight as I navigated the curves. That's when I saw her, a young woman standing by the guardrail, drenched from head to toe, her white dress clinging to her like a second skin. Instinct overrode caution. I eased onto the shoulder and rolled down the passenger side window. "Ma'am, you okay? It's dangerous out here in this fog." She nodded silently, her long black hair hanging in wet strands over her face. I unlocked the door and leaned over. "Hop in, I'll take you to the next town." She climbed into the cab without a word. Her skin was cold, ice cold, when she brushed against my arm. I turned up the heat and offered her a towel, but she didn't move, didn't speak, didn't even seem to breathe. "What's your name?" I asked, trying to fill the silence. Slowly she turned her head toward me, and though her face was obscured by her hair, I thought I saw her lips curl into the faintest of smiles. The air in the cab felt heavy, thick, as though I was driving underwater. My fingers drummed nervously on the wheel. "Where do you need to go?" I pressed. She raised one pale hand and pointed straight ahead. "Just keep driving," she whispered, her voice soft but chilling. We drove like that for miles, the road twisting through the dense fog. I snuck a glance at her every now and then, and each time she seemed more distant, more unreal. Her dress, once sopping wet, now looked dry. Her hair, though still hanging in her face, no longer dripped onto the seat. Then, just as suddenly as she had appeared, she spoke again. "You missed the turn." My eyes darted to the GPS. It didn't show any turn. "What turn?" I asked. "The one back there," she murmured. My stomach twisted as I looked in the mirror. The fog behind us seemed to have thickened, a swirling wall of grey that pulsed like a living thing. "I'll let you out here," I said firmly, slowing the truck to a stop on the shoulder. When I turned to face her, the seat was empty. No trace of the girl, no wet footprints on the floor mat. just the faint scent of earth and lilies hanging in the air. At the next truck stop, I stumbled inside and told the cashier what had happened. He nodded slowly, his eyes full of something between pity and fear. "You saw Lillian," he said. "She was killed on that road years ago. Folks say she's still looking for a ride home." Now, every time I drive through West Virginia, I watch the fog carefully, and when it rolls in thick and heavy, I keep my doors locked and my eyes on the road. Because sometimes, I swear, I hear her soft voice whisper from the passenger seat, "You missed the turn." Let's dive into the next disturbing story. My name is Frank Delaney, and after almost 3 decades on the road, I thought I'd seen every strange thing this country had to offer. Long nights and empty highways tend to play tricks on a man's mind, but one night in Mississippi I learned some things aren't tricks at all. They're warnings. It was past midnight, and I was cruising down Highway 61 with a heavy load headed for Baton Rouge. The road was quiet, the stars blotted out by thick clouds. I kept the CB radio on low just in case another trucker was nearby, but the channel was silent, leaving me alone with the soft growl of my engine and the occasional thump of the tires over uneven asphalt. Then the CB crackled to life. A voice came through, low, rough, almost like a whisper. "Breaker 19, you there, driver?" I grabbed the mic. "Go ahead. You shouldn't be out tonight," the voice rasped. "He's looking for you." A chill ran down my spine. "Who's looking for me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. There was no answer, just static. I tried calling back, but the channel stayed dead. I switched to another frequency, thinking maybe it was a prank. That's when I saw headlights in my mirrors, a pair of glowing orbs that seemed too close for comfort. I slowed a little, hoping the driver would pass, but the lights stayed right on my bumper. Frustrated, I flicked on my turn signal and pulled onto the shoulder to let them by. But as my rig rolled to a stop, the lights vanished. I leaned forward, scanning the road behind me. Nothing, just darkness. Shaking my head, I eased back onto the highway. That's when the CB crackled again. "You can't outrun him, driver. He's already here." My blood ran cold. The voice was closer this time, almost as if it were inside the cab with me. I slammed the CB off and gripped the wheel tighter, but then a thud echoed from the roof of my cab, soft at first, then louder, like footsteps. My breath came fast and shallow as I scanned the road for a place to stop. There was an old gas station ahead, its lights flickering weakly in the distance. I pulled in and killed the engine. The night fell silent, the air heavy and still. Gathering my courage, I climbed out and shined my flashlight up at the roof of the cab. Nothing. But when I turned back to the truck, I froze. Written in the condensation on my windshield were 3 words. "I found you." I didn't wait to investigate. I jumped back into the cab, locked the doors, and sped off into the night. When I finally reached Baton Rouge the next morning, I checked the windshield again. The words were gone, but the memory wasn't. Even now, when I drive down quiet highways at night, I keep my CB turned off and my eyes on the mirrors, because sometimes, in the distance, I swear I see headlights creeping up behind me, and I can almost hear that voice whisper, "You can't outrun me." Let's dive into the next disturbing story. My name is Carl Jennings, and I've been driving big rigs since I was 22. The road's been my life. Long nights, endless stretches of blacktop, and the occasional weird encounter. But nothing I've seen, not blizzards in the Rockies or drifters in the desert, prepared me for what I witnessed one night on I-40 in Arizona. It was around 2:30 in the morning. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, and the desert air felt heavier than usual. My trailer was empty after a drop-off in Flagstaff, so I planned to make good time heading west. With the highway nearly deserted, I settled into a comfortable rhythm, letting the hum of the tires lull my senses. Then I noticed movement in my rearview mirror. At first, I thought it was just my eyes playing tricks on me, shadows from the passing cacti or maybe fatigue setting in. But as I looked closer, I realized something was crouched on the catwalk between my cab and trailer. It was hard to see clearly in the dim light, but whatever it was looked human, almost. Its limbs were too long, its skin pale and stretched tight over its bones, and its eyes, God, its eyes, glowed faintly red as they locked onto mine in the mirror. My chest tightened. An instinct told me to slam on the brakes, but another part of me, the part that felt like prey, whispered, "Don't stop. Don't even look back." So I pressed harder on the accelerator, the engine growling as I pushed the truck faster down the lonely highway. The creature didn't move. Not at first. It just crouched there, fingers gripping the edge of the cab as the wind whipped around it. Then, slowly, it began to crawl forward, moving in an unnerving, insect-like way. I felt my breath catch as its hands, long and clawed, tapped lightly against the back window of my cab. Desperate, I flicked the cab lights on and off, hoping the sudden brightness would scare it off. For a moment it froze, head tilting in a jerky, unnatural motion. Then, in a blur of movement, it darted out of sight. I didn't dare stop. The next rest area was still 15 miles ahead, and every second felt like an hour. I kept checking the mirrors, expecting to see those glowing eyes staring back at me, but the creature didn't reappear. When I finally pulled into the rest stop, I jumped out of the cab with my flashlight in hand, heart pounding so hard I thought I'd pass out. I searched every inch of the rig. No scratches, no footprints, nothing. Just silence. And the faint smell of something sour, like spoiled meat, lingering in the air. I stayed in that rest stop until the sun came up, too shaken to keep driving. Another trucker, an old-timer named Roy, noticed my pale face and asked what was wrong. When I told him, his expression darkened. "You saw it, didn't you?" he muttered. "The thing in the rear view? It only shows up to drivers alone at night. Some say if you stop while it's there, you don't make it to morning." Now, every time I drive at night, I keep my mirrors angled just slightly away, because sometimes in the corner of my eye I swear I catch a glimpse of pale fingers curling over the edge of my cab. And I know it's still looking for me.